Hi, Turin. Thank you so much for being with us for this interview.
Hi, John. How are you? Thanks for having me on this talk show.
I really enjoyed your performance. I thought it was really stellar, very engaging, and such different works. So let's go through the works and then talk about your experience in playing them. Maybe we start with Chenwei's piece, Mid-Autumn Festival.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I first heard Chenwei's piece at the National Piano Violin Competition last year, which he composed the piece as one of the set pieces for the piano category. And I loved it. I thought it was very evocative, very mesmerizing. So when his piece got chosen as one of the pieces for this project, I was really excited and happy to have a chance, an opportunity to play it. But when I received the score, the one thing that kind of felt a little jarring to me was that I couldn't pinpoint the high point of the 5-minute work. And, because of my classical training, I was very used to the paradigm of pinpointing the climax and then planning the affect of the piece such that it builds up nicely to the climax. And I even preposterously asked Chenwei, could we add a couple of octaves here and drop it down an octave in the left hand, create a bigger sound? Yeah, it was a bit of a misguided interpretation approach on my part. As I journeyed with the piece a little bit more, I realized that it really necessitated a different aesthetic, something that was a lot more subtle. It wasn't about the kind of teleological build-up or form that I was used to with Western art music. So that for me was really interesting. And I think this is the beginning of my inquiry into this perhaps transcultural, or maybe just finding a different aesthetic to approach non-Western music with.
That's really interesting because I was just talking to Chenwei and he mentioned that about this question of what aesthetic is it? And his answer was also interesting. He said he had never really thought about it so much because the Chinese aesthetic, Chinese culture is so natural and a part of his everyday life that he didn't really think about it too much. So I think it gave him some pause for thought as well. And I think these are really great questions because a musical language is so much more than notes, isn't it? It's more than sound. There's a lot more that goes into that. So I think we're very interestingly placed here in Singapore with the polycultural, intercultural life that we live here.
And I got a similar experience with Chung's piece, Reef. In our conversation, he kept mentioning Zen, space, listen to the space, the silence. He wanted a lot more silence. So Reef, if you looked at the score, it's basically one system of a lot of stuff, and then one system of just rests. The rests, the silences were more expressive and communicative and integral to the meaning of the work than the sounds were.
I agree. I felt that the silence was a period of processing what was just heard, because we cannot exclude our memory of what has just happened.
We're talking about Reef being, the amalgamation of colors, of pitches, of sounds, of textures and timbres. It's really in the silences when the pedal is down and the resonance of the previous bars are still ringing in the air that we begin to hear this really interesting mix of sounds and harmonies. And I think that really is the most evocative and mesmerizing part of the music. That's where the music is, really.
And also quite indigenous to the piano, because the piano has so much capability in its sounding board and in its strings and sympathetically vibrating strings and harmonics. It's so rich. I had not realized that the Jacquard card was in so many ways a precursor of the computer programming. And that goes back about 200 years. And it's like, whoa. So things are not as new as we may think they are sometimes. Fascinating piece. And I thought your conviction was quite quite strong in it. Such a contrast to the Mid-Autumn Festival. What about the Hyetal Days? That work, again, a very different kind of piece. What was that like for you?
The word Zen comes to mind again for Hyetal Days. I explored a lot more soft sounds, subtle sounds. It's very introspective work, I think. And also out of the four composers, I know Jun An for the longest time. Not like a super long time, but at least I'm friends with him and we know each other on a personal level. That piece was written, I think 2 years ago for another pianist.
How did it feel for you to do a concert of not only living composers, but composers that you had access to, you had immediate access to, and composers who are from Singapore?
Okay, on the surface level, this music is more difficult to learn from the sheet music. When you're playing music from the common practice period, you have the sounds of the repertoire in your ears. Playing on 92.4 or friends having played it in studio classes and etc. So this music was a bit harder to approach, but I felt that my connection with it was so strong, and I could approach it from a place of intuition rather than head knowledge or having to dig deep for a more cerebral, perhaps, approach.
Do you feel that you're part of forging new aesthetics? We mentioned that word earlier, aesthetics. And do you sense new aesthetics emerging?
I think that everyone is forging new aesthetics, regardless of whether they're playing modern repertoire by living composers or playing common practice music by dead composers. We're all adding to the canon of aesthetic, if you may. And this buildup of aesthetic, of interpretative approaches really creates the aura of the work. So the work is a collection of all of these performances, these iterations of presentations. So to answer your question, yes, definitely. But regardless of repertoire, performers are constantly adding to the aesthetic of the music.
That's a good point, because aesthetic, like culture, is living. So it's in constant flux, isn't it?
Yeah, and that really is the problem for me with playing common practice repertoire. This notion that there's a fixed aesthetic or tradition that is correct and belonging to the past that we ought to aspire to. The sense that the aesthetic is constantly evolving in the space for performers of different backgrounds, different ethnicities and cultures to add to this aesthetic. It just doesn't feel like it's there. And I think, tradition can really be a baggage. And we need to realize that aesthetic is constantly evolving and we're all part of this evolution. And that's a really powerful thought.
What's so important and what you achieved so beautifully is that level of conviction and that level of engagement. So the composer is nothing without the performer. And that level of conviction came across really, really strongly. And what about black or white or red? With a tinge of white and blue? Then.
It was a dangerous piece. I had bruises on my hands from playing it. Injuries, so Americ called for fists to be used, hitting opposite ends of the keyboard. And if you aren't careful, you can easily hit your hand the wrong way against the frame of the piano, and that's what happened to me.
What is, I think, quite striking about this concert is that each of the four pieces is in a very different head place, in a very different mindset. And if you want to call it aesthetic, very, very different ones. So for you to record that and to spend, I believe, an entire day, more or less, in the studio, making more than one take, obviously. However, I did notice, I think, was it in Americ's piece, you also recorded somewhere else at home, maybe?
Tim came over to my place to get some e-reels. So, for example, for Jun An's piece, there's that shot of me staring into the space.
Yeah.
and that was taken here.
It created a sense of geography or space that you were in different places simultaneously then. You even had a hairstyle, you were wearing something different. And it's like, you couldn't imagine you're playing a Beethoven sonata and the first movement you wear something and then instantly you have a different costume for the second movement, which just happens to appear. So there's something about this video that I think has its own voice in terms of the video itself. How did you feel about that?
I think that's the beauty of the digital medium that we need to tap on in this new normal. I mean, it's too much thrown around, but it is what it is. We have to adapt our performances to the new normal. And I think this project has done a fantastic job in at least beginning to exploit the possibilities of this medium. Where, as you say, we can transcend geography, we can create narratives that transcend the fixed time and space in a way that we can't when we're tied to a concert hall, playing and replicating the idea of a work, a complete sonata. You can't change dresses between movements as much as I would like to. So, thank you for providing this idea. I might try it out in the future.
Yes, please do. Well, we are experiencing a paradigm shift. And I think for many of us musicians, before COVID-19, our idea of recording was probably largely archival. So we record a performance, that's good. We make a video of it, that's good. We put it up on YouTube, that's good. But it's archival. So it is trying to be something it's not. It's trying to be a real live performance. It's not. And why hide that? And I think this brings out this possibility of collaborating with filmmakers and creating something that is indigenous to the medium.
You're absolutely right. And it's funny you bring this up because in exactly 7 minutes, I've got a couple of filmmakers coming over to my place to collaborate on a film and music project later.
Well, it was wonderful talking to you. And thank you so much for sharing your insight on this. It's a wonderful performance. And if our viewers have not seen it, I hope they will go right to it and they will find just how striking and convincing your performances are and how different all four pieces are from each other. It's wonderful that you can be with us on this interview. It was just such a strong performance that Chu Ren made of Reef Weave.
Actually, this piece came about after I've done my previous piece for piano, for piano duo. It's called Rock Dub. With that piece, I was working with a very simple set of actions for both pianists to work against one another. Then I was asked to write a solo piano piece following that. So I was thinking, okay, what can I do with now, instead of two pianists, I have two hands, right? So I came up with this set of 10 pairs of chords distributed across right and left hand. And I was also thinking of how that kind of action, left and right, can be moderated in time to give rise to rhythm. I guess this comes from my, over the years, working with this idea of how to have music kind of generate itself in time through performance. So I guess it is always my kind of belief that music get realized in time. And so time is not something that is to be pre-composed or predetermined, but time is something that can only be realized through performance. Therefore, it always raises for me the question of what the composer then do with the elements of time. So that's why I move more and more towards this whole idea of setting up a certain physical condition for performance, so that when the performers have to perform a series of tasks within the set condition, a certain conditioning of the time aspect that gives rise to what we would have heard as rhythm in the music. So in a way, I guess I'm coming closer to, say, choreography in a dance, right? In a dance movement, say, for example. So I've been thinking a lot over the years about performance conditions. For this piece in particular, as the title suggests, right, one of the words is on weave and weaving. I mean, so over the years, I also got very interested in the act of weaving, especially because I was very fascinated by how weaving is in a way quite similar to composing. the sense that it involves, or at least composing in the way that I'm imagining it. First of all, I mean, you got to imagine how the outcome is going to be visually in terms of its patterning and color arrangement and also patterning, creating different motifs. You got to determine beforehand, and then you got to build up over time through the process of weaving to arrive at that end result. So in that way, it's similar to composition. But then, of course, weaving involves physical movement, bodily movement of the two hands, and the coordination of that. I see that more and more related to how a performance relates to the instrument and how that can be then taken into account when we think about composition. So in a way, I'm kind of expanding the organization, say, of elements when we talk about composition. We think about duration, pitch, timbre, things like that, right? When we think about organizing elements of music, I'm also trying to bring in these other additional elements of performance, and especially performance actions, performative actions, where how the player relates in a way physically to the instrument. In this piece, the idea is very simple. It has 10 sets of chords and involve alternating between the right hand and left hand. Therefore, the compositional challenge for me is about how to generate the maximum amount of variance, if you can call it that way, in terms of the end sonic results. And so that was the kind of compositional question and challenge I had for myself.
It's absolutely fascinating. And taking the analogy perhaps a step further of weave, there's always the flip side, you know, of a cashmere sweater or a carpet, and you look at the flip side of it, and it shows you, one side shows more of the process, and I suppose the other side shows more the product, if we want to call it that.
Yes.
So does that analogy extend itself here? Where is the listener? So you're speaking about the performer's physicality and choreography and relationship to the instrument. What about the listener's experience of it?
I always have a very peculiar relationship with listener, because on the one hand, I guess the composer will be a first listener, right? I am kind of also expanding in that sense, I guess, fear of listening, like what is listening for a listener? What does one actually listen to when one listen to a performance? Because of the physicality of this piece there is also the visual elements that comes into play. I guess that's why it is good that a piece like that is to be watched live. What the performer does live with two hands on the keyboard. Also, in this case, we are trying to bring out and further distort, perhaps, or enhance these visual elements through video as well. And that's why when Timothy came up with this project idea, I submitted my piece thinking that let us explore together what this video can do to enhance this visual dimension of experiencing the listening for the listener.
Did you have an input in the visual aspect?
Yeah, as we speak now, in fact, we are still going through the draft. We are at the second stage of drafting now. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the final product. But based on what I saw so far, I mean, it's very, very interesting. And earlier on, between Churan, me, and Timothy, we actually started discussing group chat. Still, I mean, we have been sharing a lot of ideas about how one feels, what one should look at visually in the performance part of it. And so how one can focus on using different angles. Then, of course, I also shared this whole aspect of weaving, and as you say, the flip side of weaving, to kind of let Timothy understand further what kind of visual kind of impetus that came to me when I'm trying to write a piece based on studying the process of weaving. Yeah.
Well, it might be possible to view it like this, that the concert is the product aspect of the weave. So it's the front side. It's the side we want people to actually experience. But our conversation, our interview, is the flip side, where you're actually talking about the process. And somehow when you put the two together, it unites the experience then,
Yes, yes.
both sides of the weave.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes.
I had a very clear experience of the piece, which I enjoyed very much. And I felt in the space between the activity, the physical activity, and the pianist did not have the physical activity of fingers playing on keys. There was, and yet there was huge activity inside the piano. So of overtone, sympathetic,
yes.
there was a lot going on.
That's right.
Which
That's
gave
right,
it also
yes.
this sense of two sides of the same coin, as it were.
I'm glad that you heard that as well, because yes, that is another aspect I've not talked about. But as I start to think beyond just organizing what can be organized, what is often very interesting is what comes out that is chaotic in this sense, right? Because depending on the type of piano you use and the acoustic of the room and the articulation of the pianist, in each performance you'll get very changing kind of morphing of the resonance. So that is actually a very interesting aspect. And so that's why in the score I actually asked for the pianist to actually listen into the resonance and then respond to the resonance. After she has articulated a set of these 10 chords, she's supposed to listen in, and then she's supposed to then respond to it with the next given set of materials. So responding meaning when does she need to come in, how loud does she want to come in. Those are the kind of performative aspect that I give freedom to the performer to be able to co-participate in this creation of the performance, as well as also in that sense to engage the performers into listening into the music or the musical situation that I have kind of created, given the materials that I've given her to execute.
Yes, the engagement of mind. Could you say that there might be a sense of yin and yang, and that if the space is more of a yin experience, but if as the performer is engaging with it, their mind is somehow perhaps also creating the next round, so that you have the white dot in the black sphere and the black dot in the white sphere, and it perpetuates itself, thus creating a kind of you mentioned unfolding, so it's a process that makes itself.
More and more for me, composition is about creating a kind of system where it then can kind of engender sonic experiences and materials in that way, and rather than a prescribed or predetermined, totally laid out kind of sequence of events. So for me, I'm going to create a system that is self-generative, so to speak. But then the system, nevertheless, each time for each work is a unique self-contained system, so that then you have this identity of this piece, which is quite different from another one. So in that sense, I guess it takes me away from thinking more in the traditional way of organizing elements. So in a way, I'm just trying to organize a situation, so to speak, for performance.
You mentioned chaos some. I think what's so fascinating always would be emergent qualities, and chaos is a perception, isn't it? Sometimes I even think chaos is a decision, an ordered decision. And it's not out there. You know, I don't think there's any chaos out there. There's no order out there either. It's decision. It's a perception.
It's a systemic kind of thing, right? I mean, it's like when you're within it and you're involved in it through your relationship with the elements around, then you start to have this sensation or perception of either order or chaos or anything in between. Once you have a greater sense of control, you might perceive order. Once you start to feel a bit insecure or uncomfortable with the situation, then you might feel that it's a bit chaotic. So in a way, it's also either performer or listeners experience a psychological experience of the situation that they're put in. And that situation, in our case for music, will be a sonic and performative situation.
It's fascinating how we got into the piece, because when we first hear, we may think perhaps this is something that the brain is searching for the order. in it. But it's only when we get several cycles of the
Yes.
yang and the yin that we realize, oh, the hierarchical level of order is perhaps different than what we first anticipated it to be. And I think that's where a lot of the interest happens, when the listener has the eureka moment of, oh, this is what it is.
I hope that is how the listener will experience the piece. So yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This whole dynamic shifting all the time of ground. But then yet you're often trying to make sense of something, and then when it slips away, and then you try to find another ground on which to then perch to make sense of the new situation. But all the time you're always trying to find that balance. Like say balance between yin and yang. You're always trying to find that balance again and again and again. And I guess that's the whole dynamic quality of a piece that I always try to create. Yeah.
And life, order and chaos are emergent qualities that are transient.
Yes, exactly.
Well, this is fascinating speaking to you, and I'm sure our listeners will get more insight to the work through this conversation. Hi, Chenwei. You wrote a piece that is Mid-Autumn Festival, and so it's coming very much from a tradition, a very old tradition, and a tradition that clearly means a lot. So could you start by talking about that as an entry point into the work?
This was a set of 4 pieces, Festivals of Singapore, composed for the National Piano and Violin Competition for last year. Yeah, since there were 4 pieces commissioned, I thought I would do one Chinese, one Malay, one Indian, and one the others was the National Day, so that it's like all-encompassing. Okay, so the Chinese one was the Mid-Autumn Festival. So I wanted to do something Chinese but sounding classy to Western ears, because if I do something like Chinese New Year, then it's a lot of it would be a lot of the cliche impressions of how Chinese music sounds like. So through this I tried to do something rather impressionistic in style.
What about the relation of the instruments? You're quite familiar, having written a great deal for Chinese instruments, and even co-authoring a book on the subject. So how does that inform your writing for piano?
When we talk about the nuances of Chinese music, usually most of it lies in things like the slides or glides. Okay, so like, so those are the very important. This kind of glides are important for Chinese music performance. And of course, we can't have that on the piano, because it's one key is one key. So they are all discrete notes, and so I try to evoke the Chinese aesthetics through other means, like imitation of the guzheng, glissandos, or yangqin figurations, and also pipa techniques like the wu zhilun or 5-finger tremolo that goes like this. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's the technique. Okay, and now there's a related technique called the tiaolun. So instead of playing all 5 notes on the same string, you can play another string with the thumb pluck, and the melody notes with the other 4 fingers. So if I do it in slow motion, it's like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, at any one point, there's only 1 note being played. But if I play it fast, it gives the illusion that there are 2 voices. So because there's actually theoretically there's a gap every 5 notes for the first string, because I use a thumb to pluck another string. But if I play in quick succession, it doesn't sound obvious. It sounds like there's a 2 voice thing. So I use this in one section of my piece, where the pianist has to do the tremolo.
And it's these things that actually lend the authenticity and the feeling that it is coming from the heart of the tradition. Then, did you work with the pianist, Chu Ren?
She actually called me to ask about the aesthetics of the piece. She asked some things that I have been always taken for granted. So like she asked me like how does the Chinese aesthetic differ from the Western aesthetic? And you know, when I try to compose something in Indian or Malay or Arab style, I'm very conscious about what the aesthetic is. But when I compose in the Chinese style, actually I'm not conscious of the aesthetic because it's so it just feels like it's, you know, I've been composing that all along, and I just take it for granted. We didn't actually like have a chance to like you know, sit down together and like you know, look at it. Okay, can you try this? Can you try that? So I think that was actually in the plan, you know, we send recordings and comments, but I think in the end both of us were busy with our own things, and we just end up forgetting about it. I usually don't micromanage how musician plays my piece, and I also welcome to differing interpretations, including interpretations that differ from how I originally envisioned my piece to be. And actually, you know, sometimes if the interpretation makes a good sense, I might, you know, end up editing my score to the interpretation rather than expecting the interpretation to fit my score.
That question about aesthetic is certainly very interesting, and that's where the collaboration, it brings questions to us as composers that we may assume or we may take for granted. I think that's always an important part of the fabric. That is collaboration. What about the visual aspect?
I left the aesthetics to Timothy to decide. If I'm not an expert on visual design, I shouldn't advise on it. I think the visuals look beautiful, so bravo to Timothy for his visual design. I commented on things, some aspects of the video edit. For example, previously also produced concert recordings a few years ago, but I don't do it anymore now because I'm mainly focusing on composition. So I think there's a counterpoint between the visuals and the sound. We have this thing to consider called punctuation. So for example, if there's a break, I mean, music can have a flow or have a break. So if there's a break, like, you know, some end of a phrase or cadence or something like that, and if the visuals, the video does the same thing, like the video also has a cut at the same point as the music, where the music has a cut, it might emphasize that cut, that break too much, or that punctuation too much. And so actually my suggestions were more on things like, you know, how to make the video have and the music have a flow together, rather than cuts in the video accentuating the cuts in the music.
That's a very good point, because unlike a concert, a live concert, the audience can actually close their eyes and still have a full enjoyment of, in fact, sometimes it's even more in-depth listening when the eyes are closed. And there's a lot of archiving of concerts. So you watch a video of a performer doing a concert, but that's an archive. So it's not meant to be a filmic work. So you can still close your eyes. But with this concert, the visual is very much planned into it, and it creates what I would call, it's a bit of a gestalt experience of what you see and what you hear actually become something else, the combined of it. And I think that's one of the things that's very interesting about these two concerts.
Video is also part of the artwork. Like as opposed to saying like we'll have the main thing is the performance, and then the video is just there to prove that the musician was playing, you know. It's
a lovely piece and has a certain joyfulness to it. So I'm sure our viewers, if they haven't heard it yet, would enjoy it very much. Thank you very much, Chenwei. Thank you for being with us today. Hi, Junan. You mentioned that you transcribed The Sound of Rain and the polyphony of rain. Could you talk a little bit about that process?
For me, a lot of my pieces are inspired by the things around me, the things I hear. And it can be very minute things. It might be, you know, maybe that bird that sings outside my window. And then in this case, it's the sound of rain. right here in front of my computer. There's a little awning that drips rain every time the rain has ended, constantly bombarding me with this kind of polyrhythmic ideas that it actually creates just by the rain dripping off the sides of the windows here. And it fascinates me because a lot of my pieces deal with polyrhythms in a kind of ambient way. So the polyrhythms actually kind of fold into each other to form like a wash of sound that is very immersive. I think it's a combination of what I tend to do as a composer, thinking about sound as an ambient thing that is incorporated into my music, and something that is I actually hear right here in front of my desk. Rain is fascinating. Rain is all around us, and rain is very much part and parcel of life in Singapore.
Very interesting is the transcription of something external that is actually put inside of music. One thinks of Messiaen and how he transcribed bird songs and would actually put that into his music itself. So you've transcribed polyrhythmic rain. What did you do with that material that you transcribed?
Transcription for me was the first step. So I have as much kind of rhythmic possibilities as possible, but ultimately it still has to be a piece of music being played on the piano. So I also think about the kind of practical applications of such rhythms, because if the rhythm is too complicated and the fingers start to kind of fold against each other and stumble upon each other, that will not be very effective as a piece of music. It's a combination of an expression and of course thinking of it as really a piano piece, something that a piano uniquely can express using 10 fingers on the keyboard, specific to the, I wouldn't say idiom because polyrhythms might not be idiomatic in such a way, but something that the piano can do in itself very well, and maybe not on other instruments. So this is really a piece that's written for piano and inspired by the transcriptions. Transcriptions are also quite loosely interpreted because form, phrasing, and harmony still play a big role in terms of how the piece actually turns up. So I start off from the transcription, but I did end up in ways that musically more attuned than just strictly transcribing rhythmic structures. Yeah,
and at some point it becomes more than the starting point, and it's not just about rain. It's not just about that. That's only a starting point, and there's a moment in which it transcends that, and it becomes something more of a musical experience itself rather than programmatic. That's very important. That's the magic in composition too, I think, is when you take an idea, if it's a found sound or a transcribed sound, and that actually morphs into something, and that process is quite exciting, I think. You've worked with Chu-Ran on this?
Yeah, we met up to talk about some ideas that are in the piece. For me, a lot of my pieces are left a lot of things kind of open-ended for the performers to kind of think of and interpret. Because I'm a true believer that a piece of music is not just an expression of me as the composer, but also an amalgamation of the performers or the experience of the listeners for that complete experience. For example, something that we talked about when we met was the paddling of the pieces and where and when to sustain what notes, for example. I gave some inference in the score regarding how it might be approached, but I think I gave Chu-Ran quite a good amount of flexibility to kind of play with the pedals a little bit, to kind of coax another layer of musical affect or meaning into the piece of music beyond just what I'm imagining. Even though it's not specifically written for children per se, it's still very exciting because in the hands of every different performer, there is something new to be derived from it.
I understand from our earlier conversations that this has been performed before. Can you talk about its first performance?
Sure. This was actually commissioned by Zhang Huizi for a performance at Vail Hall at Carnegie. She commissioned a number of piano pieces, of which this is part of that set of pieces. I just wanted to write something that is really representative of my compositional voice, giving the opportunity. And it has translated into, like I mentioned at the start of this interview, translated into the ambient nature of the music. It's translated into how I use music around me, and also the idea of open-endedness in my music, where the performer does take steps to understand the music in their own domain. The initial performance turned out really well, but I'm excited it has become a piece that has been played a few times. And now with the video, it has become yet another kind of layer to its progression, because I don't believe any piece should be stagnant. A piece of music can evolve when it comes to the different times. And now, we are all in this pandemic. The online platform really plays into the idea of that video presentation that the piece has now adopted, which I think is really exciting.
Did you have any part in the video, in the visuals?
I did give some suggestions, although I was careful to say that they don't have to listen to me completely. The whole idea is to think about slow progressions throughout that piece of music in terms of its visual. It starts off as black and white and a little bit more blurry, and it kind of slowly builds into something with clarity and something that's more color, a little bit like the gray skies clearing up, so to speak. And another aspect that I included, that I wanted to include, was the frontal shot of children just staring into the camera in a contemplative way. Because this piece in itself is quite a contemplative piece. It's not really an outward spurt of emotion, but it's more an inward looking at how the sounds cascade with each other into this meditative, self-reflective manner. Yeah.
I found it to be very meditative, very calming. I really liked it. And what do you think of coincidences? I don't know if our audience can actually hear it, but it's thundering wildly at both of our places, and it's pouring down rain. And as I've done 12 interviews, and you are the 12th, and your piece is about rain, and it's only in this conversation that I'm experiencing a downpour, and I'm hearing the sound of rain on my roof. So that's quite coincidental.
I like coincidences because sometimes in music, in the creative process, I don't want to believe that everything is controlled. There's a lot of things in our work as composers, as musicians, that's out of our control. Yeah. And a lot of the coincidences that occur during that process can be something that is good for the music, good for the piece. That's what I feel. Happy accidents, right? Sometimes, there are some pieces where, I notated some notes a little bit wrongly on finale, and it's been played and it's become part of the piece. When it comes to coincidences in music, because music is very transient, isn't it? Music only exists at the time when it's played, and before that, when it's in score form or it's in a form of notation, it actually exists exists outside the idea of heard sounds and music. So even in a performance where someone totally messes up the performance, there is something to say about the piece of music, even though it's not performed to the letter. So coincidence itself plays a big role, and a good role.
Stravinsky had mentioned in his Eliot Norton lecture series at Harvard that compositional genius is the power more of observation and to observe accidents, that it is in the commonest of things that actually a moment of beauty, a moment of happenstance, which is what we call serendipity then. And if we're open to that, then anything's possible.
I agree totally with that saying, because ultimately we're not machines, and mistakes is what really makes us human. And mistakes in making music totally kind of quantifies the kind of process or the experience of actually learning or playing music themselves. A lot of people ask me, when MIDI or computer music is so good at replicating the music that we write, why do we still need live performance? And I answer with the same answer, saying that, music without that human touch or without that possibility of error really removes it from the human condition and how music making represents us as human beings. I totally like the idea of coincidences or accidents in music. I think it's not something we should try and avoid, something we should embrace, and maybe something that can come out of it from the process itself.
That's very inspiring, and I think it's good for our listeners to hear that and to know what works behind the scene of composers. And so for any of our viewers who have not watched the concert yet, please do. And who knows, maybe when you listen to it, it might even start to rain. Americ, it's good to see you. Let's talk about the title first. What a title. It's so enigmatic then.
Firstly, to do with the title, first and foremost, I want to clarify, it is not a political statement, although it is politically inspired. The piece is politically inspired, but it's not to do with, it's not a statement. So when we talk about the black or white, actually, it was from an observation I had to do with the political events. That was in Hong Kong, yeah. This was before George Floyd, so this is it's not really because of racism or anything, yes. And I took it from the point of, as an observer, what was happening during that time in terms of color, you know, when people, they are dressed in black, or even now, yeah, whether they're dressed in black
Black
or
Lives
white.
Matter movement.
Exactly, yeah. It kind of struck a tone with me as an observer. The concept of something against something, yeah. So we're talking about something like contra. And that became like the concept of the work when I had the black keys against the white keys. So to have a certain, to do with the density, the number of black and the number of white keys, yeah.
So there's a literal application somewhat in the title.
Yes, but it's not a political statement. It is not, it is not.
And yet all the colors are colors. And they are all vibrations. So are you looking at some connectivity of color and sound? Does that play in your musical psyche?
It was actually an observation. So I was actually curious with the density of the black notes and the density of the white notes, how they come together, whether does it come out something harmonious, and what kind of sound color it actually comes out of it. But a lot has to do with actually the dramatic effect being brought about by the performer in terms of the color, the kind of emotions that it can bring out.
I first thought of Scriabin and his color organ and synesthesia. I'm synesthetic, for example. So I do see colors with certain kinds of sounds then. So, but there's no particular reference to that.
Actually, no.
And the creation of this piece, did you have a particular pianist in mind when you wrote it?
When I was asked to write this work, it was actually for Fu Mei Yi. I was grateful for that. And yeah, we had some rehearsals and was premiered at the Yongsu.
This is the second. Is this the second performance of it?
Yes, actually, at the time when I worked with Mei Yi, it was a live performance. So for me, the dramatic effect in a live performance is extremely important because there's a lot of drama in the work. It's an expressive work. I mean, it's not the most nice sounding or friendly for the performer, but it's a kind of effect, the kind of, I would say, unrest or agony that is being brought out, yeah, in the music, and that is amplified.
The duration exacerbates that, or the duration brings that out. It's not a 2-minute piece.
It's not, yeah.
That experience is something quite strong. It does relate to the experiences we would have in our observations of things that happen in everyday life, or systems, those feelings of things. Right.
Especially when we have something against something, and we not being part of it, but being observers, third party, looking at it from a different standpoint, it's actually quite interesting to see how things come together. Whether is it individual parties or in like the left hand and right hand in this piece, are they individual entities, or are we looking at a kind of harmonious whole?
Well, perhaps playing devil's advocate a bit. It felt, I mean, in a very powerful way, but music that's only pretty is not going to do much. I mean, we need all kinds of experiences. And there was very much a tyranny, order, fascist kind of order then, and relentless.
Yes. Yeah.
So you seem to be agreeing.
Yes.
Then
yes.
succeeded.
Especially with the colpunio in the work,
there
there's a lot of fists
is
and
that
hammering going around.
All related to what humans do when they're angry. This we find that in protest. You know, the fist. The fist seems to be universal, doesn't it?
Yes.
So you're using that on the piano, then.
Yes. Yes.
I know.
Yes.
And the experience of the pianist, it must be quite extraordinary too.
Yeah, I mean, Churan, she's so disciplined when learning the work. I mean, it's such a difficult work. She learned it really fast, And she had her own interpretation. At the beginning, I didn't want to tell what the work is about because, I mean, it is not a political statement, yeah. So she had her own interpretation, which was
in this, you
very,
seem
very interesting.
elusive to
Yes.
wanting to reveal
So
too
I'm
much
very
about
open
the
to that.
piece.
Yeah.
Does catharsis come
Thank
into
you.
play?
Yeah.
So that is, how does one feel after the work, which is just as important as the experience of the work itself?
That was so important for me. And I think, especially in the live performance, I can see that, especially for the performer, they are totally exhausted. That kind of energy is really viral, yeah? When we see the person being brought to the limits, to the extreme. I find that interesting. And actually for this project, when it's been made into the video, I think certain scenes and how it was being captured, being made by Timothy, was fantastic. It actually brought out those emotions, those drama, and even the lethargy.
That kind of reminded me of when years ago, when I used to work out at a gym and I had a trainer and I'm doing weightlifting and the trainer was saying, push, push, push. And you're like, no, he said, don't give up, push, push, push. This relentless quality to it. Yeah. The filmic aspect of it was also equally powerful and transforms the experience of the piece, as opposed to a stage performance that may not have filmic elements.
So when Tim did the video, when I saw it, I thought it really brought out a lot of different angles, how people can actually look at it. For example, if it's live, we don't really see what's really happening at a keyboard, yeah, from that angle, from the bird's eye view. But right now, with the video, we see a lot of things that the pianist is actually doing. And I think that is really dramatic, and we brought out certain things, especially with the repetitions. Yeah, the way he did it, and I think especially to do with the lighting and the colors, the differentiation of colors and diffusion of it, we really brought out the structure of the work as well, and that really gave a different perspective, how I look at my own work in the end.
Yeah, I thought that was very powerful, and it brought out
Yes.
Another layer of violence. I thought it was very powerful that the concert ended with this. It's like an explosion. What a finale! This whole experience. Have you worked with film before, actually, to create the, as opposed to, and this is something I have been talking with other composers and performers. Before COVID-19, I think a lot of us thought of a music video, as really an archival reproduction of a live performance. Just film the live performance, put it on YouTube, and then there you go. But this seems to be opening up a new vista of possibilities of bringing in a truly filmic identity.
Yeah, I find this really interesting because before that, usually we would set music to films that have already been made, or it would be collaborative processes. Like previously, I did some where the film has already been made, so I actually created a sound design for it. But in this project, it's the other way around. Yeah, the music has already been written. Yes, and Tim did a film, and it enhanced the music. Yeah, before we thought the other way around. It's like the music to enhance the film.
Thank you very much, Americ. It's been very insightful to hear from you. Timothy, it's great to have you in this interview. Such an exciting project. And you've been the producer of this project. It's just very pioneering, really exciting. Can you tell us a few things about the origin of this project, the conceptualization?
It all started out when NAC introduced the digital presentation grant. And I was wondering, what could I do to bring forward Singapore's new music scene? And it was when I started to dig around one of my favorites, especially Formula One videos. Formula One is basically a racing series that happens worldwide. Yeah, I'm actually quite a racing fan.
Zoom!
Yes, especially watching all those onboard driver cameras. So I was like, wow, fighting against the car whenever they drive all those very tricky corners, all the streets.
Makes you feel like you're there, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes you feel like you're there. And I realized that they were using a bunch of action cameras laid on their cars, like above their heads or maybe on the front, like what happened when they crashed. Wow, that was terrifying. I then tried to transfer the idea over to musical instruments. the violin and the piano seem to be the more viable instruments for now. We did consider others like the trombone, but not yet.
Sliding around? That would be awfully.
Yes, sliding around, trombone would have been equally
choreographed.
effective as the violin, viola, and the piano. Eventually, it came to the shortlist of viola and piano because we knew the new music specialists of those instruments.
That's interesting that it's in that order. So the instrument choice came from the GoPro camera inception.
Yeah, actually, they have been doing it 5 years ago for the GoPro, but then for some reason, the idea died off for no good reason.
So how does that change, do you believe, the perception of the work itself? And would all works lend themselves to that? Of course, you had different camera angles for each one anyways, because
Yes.
you want to make it somehow match or fit or agree or disagree, but it had to have a relationship. How did you decide on how it would be done for the various ones?
That has to do with, first of all, proposal. And at the time, I had to make a short list of a few works for NAC to know what sort of works I'm talking about and how they could be mounted onto the instruments and onto the instrumentalists, like on the scroll, on the violinist's head, and also behind the right hand wrist.
And it changes the performance technique because the player has a new weight and a shifting of gravity, which is somewhat different.
There were some handling challenges as well. For example, Christopher had to get used to a little bit more torque because viola is actually a bigger instrument than a violin, and well, I'm a little bit fine here. For him, it is quite a big difference.
Well, it certainly became visceral. The experience was very somatic, very visceral in the watching of it. So you feel like you're there, like a roller coaster sometimes.
We also opened the call for scores to the other composers to tape up because I also believe in the diversity of the works. I mean, the works that I pre-drafted, there were 4 of them, which were like the most suitable works for the viola and the piano on the GoPro so far. In a sense, I was right and wrong that there are other works that also suit the GoPro really well. Wrong in the sense that I did not realize that these works were also very suitable for GoPro in different ways.
I remember some years ago, maybe 25 years ago, Meredith Monk, the performance artist, did a show where she had a small camera in her mouth, and she's a singer. So actually, we saw on a big screen her larynx as she sang her vocal cords. It was a new experience. So that's quite a journey to do that. And I think it's quite remarkable because most musicians probably before COVID-19 thought of live performance first, and then any further reproductions of that were through a video. And the video would be archival. So you video a concert and then you upload it on YouTube and there you go. And so it didn't really, often a filmic aspect was not there. There was no filmic aspect. So this adds a new layer of perception in it. So I thought it was very, very exciting in that respect, very innovative.
Thank you. I was very happy to engage a director of filmography who is experienced in shooting all those exciting videos, not just for music videos, but also for commercials as well. And I'm very happy to have engaged him. I also learned a lot with him for how to produce a video, and wow, he's very perfectionistic.
I thought it was very sensitive. Yeah, the video work was very sensitive to the music. And you were very visionary to have that idea. But many people have ideas. You actually saw it through. I can only imagine it was challenging. Can you talk a little bit about how challenging it was?
There are numerous challenges to that. And the first thing is trying to plan for the kind of angles to shoot, and also catering to different requirements from the composers, because some composers have a very light hand. Some have very heavy hands, ask for a lot of edits. Maybe I should joke with that person that we should all open a video production company together.
Well, it was interesting. The response from the composers was quite mixed. Some felt that was out of their element and they just let it be. And then others had a more hands-on involvement with it. And so
yes.
that made the producer's job more colorful, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed. There are certain times whereby for those who did not say what I should do, right? For one particular piece that was really difficult to handle. You did not hear it wrong, because the person did not tell me what to do. It was actually more difficult. Like, how do I keep it more engaging throughout the whole video and exploring the whole theme about identities?
There was one piece too. This is where Chu Ren was playing, and it took the pianist out of, in a way, out of body, because it took her out of studio. I think you actually went to her home to film some of it, and there were some images of her against some kind of Chinese calligraphy in the background. I thought that was quite unique, and I liked it actually, because it created the almost non-corporeal sense of a film where you can do anything you want to. You're not abiding by the laws of physics.
I was actually very thankful that I thought about that idea about filming at two different places. I was so thankful I did not just stick to the studio, even though the director of photography and the recording studio did a tremendous job in such high quality production. I mean, I did a video editing.
It seems like you had quite a committed team of people working with you, the composers, the performers, your team of crew, your camera work, the editing, yourself. It was quite a teamwork, wasn't it?
It was quite a teamwork as a first-time producer. That was immense. I mean, after that job is done, it's now up to me to do the video production, and that was like, wow, a learning curve to climb, which I succeeded.
No, congratulations. Although I think it's also an inspiration to musicians that what we do has really no limit, and that the collaboration with others and venturing into other art forms is extremely exciting and very fruitful, as we can see in this project.
I just hope to be able to continue this series, but that depends on the COVID-19 situation.
I think it's a wonderful project, and hopefully we can see more of that.